Children of the Stones by Jeremy Burnham and Trevor Ray. Chapter 7. The reason I've kept you in, Miss Clegg was saying, has nothing to do with punishment. Rome wasn't built in a day, and I expect it will be some time before you are able to take your places at the high table. But I have reason to think that one of you, I shan't say which one, is on the verge of making a breakthrough. If I'm right, I want his or her success to be an inspiration to the rest, an example of what you will eventually each be able to achieve. Matthew and Sandra glanced at each other. They, together with Kevin and Jimmo, had been asked to stay behind after class, and Matthew had feared the worst. But Miss Clegg seemed to be in a good mood, and she didn't appear to be setting them any extra work. She just wanted to give them a pep talk. But which one of them was she talking about? Matthew knew it wasn't him. His head still ached, and he had never felt less like being on the verge of a breakthrough. Sandra looked as bewildered as he was, and as for Kevin and Jimmo, the thought of either of them ever sitting at the high table was laughable. Neither of them could even add. Miss Clegg moved to the blackboard. On it were some incomprehensible problems she had set the bright children. Now, she said, I know that questions like these have so far been beyond you, but I wonder if anyone today feels like attempting one of them. Sandra groaned. Kevin blew a soft raspberry. Nothing had changed. Matthew leaned back in his chair, knowing that Miss Clegg was wasting her time. If none of them could solve the problems yesterday, why should they do any better today? They weren't suddenly going to change into geniuses overnight. Or were they? Out of the corner of his eye, Matthew saw Jimmo slowly raise his hand. Was he out of his tiny mind? He'd have difficulty in counting his father's cows. Miss Clegg was smiling at him. Yes, Jimmo? I think I could do them, miss. Splendid! She held out the chalk. Suppose you work out that first Bessel transform. Jimmo stood up, took the chalk, and began to write on the blackboard. Slowly at first, then, with increasing speed as he gained confidence, the complicated equation resolved itself. Matthew stared, open-mouthed. It was a miracle. There was no other word for it. So it was possible to turn into a genius overnight. He looked at the others and saw that they were equally bewildered. Kevin seemed to have completely run out of raspberries. His work done, Jimmo handed the chalk back to Miss Clegg, smiling a vacant, happy smile. She put her arm around his shoulders. Bravo, Jimmo! Tomorrow you may take your place at the high table. She turned to the others. You see what can be done? Sooner or later, you'll all be able to achieve that standard. I promise you. So don't give up hope. It's just a question of time. Pushing Jimmo in front of her, she walked out of the classroom. Kevin rose and crossed slowly over to the blackboard, shaking his head in awe. I don't get it, he said. Yesterday a dum-dum, and today he's doing tricks like that. What happened in between? Same thing that happened to the rest of them, said Sandra softly. What's that? I don't know, but whatever it is, I don't want it to happen to me. Kevin pointed at Matthew. What about Bright Boy here? If he gets the treatment, he'll make Einstein look like a beginner. Treatment, said Matthew. You think that's what Jimmo got? Some kind of treatment. Don't ask. Kevin picked up the eraser and savagely wiped the blackboard clean. Well, if it is a treatment, Matthew went on, Who gives it? And why? We'll just have to wait and see, won't we? What you mean? Kevin shrugged. Obvious. There's only us three left. It's just a question of who's next. There was an uneasy silence. The prospect of them being turned into a happy one hung over each of them like a pall. But where did the threat come from? If they didn't know that, how could they protect themselves against it? We must try and stick together, said Matthew urgently. Compare notes whenever we can. Then no one can take us by surprise. There was a soft tap at the window. Matthew jumped up to hear his heart racing, to see Di's face, flattened against the heavy casement. Di! Relieved that the visitor was someone he recognized, he ran over and opened the catch. Di peered suspiciously into the room to make sure the coast was clear. Sorry, boy, he rumbled. It had to be done, see? What had to be done? Had to get you away from there. Shock treatment. That was the only way. Oh, dangerous it was. He heaved himself through the narrow opening, puffing and blowing with the effort. Once inside, he collapsed onto the window seat, exhausted. So it was you, said Matthew accusingly. It was you who grabbed my arm last night. Di nodded, panting for breath. Your savior. I am. Thank your lucky stars I was there to save you. Save me from what? The past? Ah, that's it. The past, my past, and your future. I don't understand. I'll let you in on a secret, boy. Neither do I. Sandra moved to join them. Di, you understand something which is more than what we do. The old man contemplated her in silence for a moment. I feel things, miss. It's not the same as understanding. What do you feel? Asked Kevin, sitting next to him on the seat. What do I feel? I feel haunted. The children looked at each other in alarm. No, not by ghosts or anything like that. He turned and gazed out of the window toward the village. But something happened here a long time ago, and it's happening again today. Bogey, bogey, said Kevin, trying to lighten the mood of the foreboding Di had created. Any idea what? Everyone turned to stone, said Matthew, suddenly. The others stared at him. Go on, boy, said Di. Explain yourself. I have a picture at home. I think it's meant to be Milbury in the old days, and it shows people turning into stone. Sandra shuddered. You mean all the stones out there might be people? Kevin giggled nervously. What a petrifying thought. But Matthew didn't laugh. He was trying to think back, to remember the impression the picture had first made on him. No, I think it's more complicated than that. I think this village is... Oh, I can't explain it. Like a maze it is, said Di, half to himself, with treasure at the center. Trouble is, there's danger too. What kind of danger? Asked Kevin. If I knew that, we could avoid it, couldn't we? But we can't. Why not? Because it's there. In the past. And in the future. Matthew wished the old man wouldn't keep talking in riddles. You say there's treasure here, he said. What treasure? The most priceless treasure of all. Knowledge. He fumbled in the pocket of his coat and produced a thick, round disc. What do you make of this? He asked, holding it up to the light. What is it? Where did you get it? Matthew held out his hand for the disc, but Di clutched it to his body, protectively. part of the treasure," said Di mysteriously. "I found it. It came to me. Interest your father, maybe?" "Dad?" Matthew glanced at Sandra. "More in your mum's line, isn't it?" "Yes. Shall I show it to her?" "No." Di shrank away with mirth. "It's mine. Came to me." Matthew crouched down beside him. "We won't take it then. We'll make a tracing. Will you let us do that?" "Like a brass rubbing," said Kevin excitedly. "I'll get some tracing paper." He ran over to his desk. Di closed his eyes, still hugging the disc. "It's a key," he said softly. "That's what it is. My key." But he let them make a tracing, and the children cycled over to the museum to show it to Margaret. She studied the design with interest. "The original's made of clay, do you think?" "Either that or some kind of stone," said Sandra. "It looks very old." Margaret pinned the tracing to the wall and inspected it closely. "Interesting," she said thoughtfully. "Looks like a snake," said Matthew. "No, I think it's a serpent." "What's the difference?" asked Kevin. "They both give me the willies." "A serpent's bigger and more powerful. It's also a symbol." "A symbol of what?" "It was the original guardian of knowledge. Later, serpents were supposed to protect sacred hills and mazes." "Di knew that," said Matthew. "He said something about the village being like a maze with treasure at the center." "And the treasure was knowledge," Sandra added. Margaret frowned. "How did he know that?" "He didn't know, Mum. He just felt it." Kevin peered at the tracing. "And the danger in the maze may have been this yucky snake thing." Of course. Margaret suddenly remembered where she had seen the design before. "Di's feelings are remarkably accurate. This symbol has a special significance here." "The church," said Sandra suddenly. "There's a serpent, carved on the font," she giggled. "It's biting the foot of a bishop." Margaret smiled. "That's right. And I told you what that meant, remember? It represents the battle between pagan and Christian." "Exactly. After the battle was over, Christians often built their churches on the sites of the pagan temples, ground that was already sacred, but they couldn't be sure that the ancient religion had been completely stamped out. So the carving on that font was probably intended as a warning." Matthew felt a pricking sensation at the nape of his neck. "A warning to be constantly on their guard against the power of the serpent." "Yes." Sandra thought for a moment. "Then, this thing of Di's, whatever it is pagan?" "Oh, there's no doubt about that. Some sort of charm or amulet to keep the owner from harm, perhaps. I'd love to see the original." Matthew looked at the others. "We'll get it," he said, firmly, "even if we have to bring the owner." That evening, when Adam arrived at the pub, he found Hendrik at the bar. "Hello," he said cheerfully. "I've been waiting for you." "Me? Why?" "First things first. What'll you have?" "No, I'll get them." He pointed at Hendrik's glass. "Two of those, please, George." As the landlord moved to fetch the drinks, Hendrik delved into his pocket and produced a yellow envelope. "Mrs. Crabtree told me there was a telegram for you. I promised to deliver it." "Ah, thanks. I've been waiting for that." Adam tore open the envelope and read the message carefully. Hendrik sipped his drink, watching him. "Not bad news, I hope." "No. It's from Mount Palomar Observatory, in answer to a telegram of my own." "Oh?" Just some research they've done for me. Concerning Milbury. Yes, I wondered if the stones were aligned to a point immediately above the circle, and if so, what was on the alignment path. I could find no connection between the circle and any of the major stars or planets. It didn't make sense. Hendrick's dark eyes regarded him with interest. And now it does. In a way, Adam waved the telegram. According to this, it's aligned to a supernova that exploded centuries before Christ, somewhere around the start of man's rational existence. There's nothing there now but a black hole. A huge mass of imploding energy. I could have told you that, said Hendrick quietly. You? The landlord brought out the drinks and Adam paid for them. What do you know about the supernova? Hendrick smiled. Let's go and sit down. They moved over to one of the tables. It's unfair of me, Hendrick went on. I should have introduced myself properly when we first met. Adam stared at him, the penny finally dropping. Of course. Hendrick's supernova. You're Raphael Hendrick, the astronomer. Ex-astronomer. I resigned my chair at Cambridge 5 years ago. I remember. I always wondered why. Because of some papers. Papers? Hendrick toyed with his glass. They were unearthed by a colleague, written in dog Latin in a style earlier than Bede's. About 6th century, a mishmash of fact and fiction about megalithic Britain, legends and stories handed down through the centuries, which the author had assembled in some sort of order. None of them could be authenticated, of course, but there was one event which, because of my discovery of the supernova, made me sit up and take notice. What was that? Asked Adam, fascinated. Someone in this village, Wheel Wicca, as it was then called, was reported by bardic tradition as having seen a star explode. So, that's why you settled in Milbury, because someone here actually witnessed the beginning of the black hole. It was like coming home. Even though there's nothing up there, Hendrick glanced up at him sharply. The black hole's there. I meant, of course, there's nothing to see. But that's what's so intriguing, don't you think? To know it's there and yet not be able to see it? Adam grinned. I'm afraid my interests are more earthbound. You know what constellation it's in? Ursa Major. Exactly. The Great Bear. And as you probably know, the bear was once an object of veneration. The bear cult is one of the earliest known religions. Originated perhaps by that primitive cave dweller who saw your supernova explode. For some reason, this seemed to offend Hendrick. Primitive cave dweller, he said coolly. According to legend, he was a visionary, a spiritual leader, a man of destiny. I beg his pardon, said Adam soothingly. I think you might be well advised to do so. There was no doubt that, as far as Hendrick was concerned, the conversation had taken an unfortunate turn. Adam was at a loss. What had he said to cause this sudden iciness? It was time to change the subject. By the way, he said, my son tells me he saw some sort of dance taking place outside your house last night. Hendrik looked surprised. He must have been up very late. I thought he'd invented it at first, but Mrs. Crabtree tells me it's not unusual. No, it's an old custom. My house is supposed to have been built on sacred ground, you see, and the villagers form a ring to protect it from, well, evil. Adam thought for a moment. Sacred ground, eh? Could that have anything to do with the ley lines? Ley lines? According to Matthew, Highfield House is completely surrounded by them. I wonder if the ground was sacred because they formed a sort of protective barrier. Hendrik stared at him, impressed. You mean, like the ring of the villagers? Yes. Interesting theory. Well, you must come to dinner soon and put it to the test. See if you feel any vibrations. Thanks. I'd like that. Can't ask you yet, I'm afraid. Because of protocol. One has to be careful in a place this size. If I didn't invite everyone in strict rotation, I'd get into terrible trouble. I understand, but I'd be interested to see one of the village rituals. Next time there is one, would you let me know? Hendrik finished off his drink. There's one tomorrow, as a matter of fact, not at my house. Near the stone. Near the stones. It's a Wickestane. The day the people used to bury one of them. Nowadays, we have a Morris dance instead. A Morris dance? Adam winced. I'm afraid they rather bore me. They all look the same. I know what you mean. Nevertheless, the villagers enjoy them, and to tell you the truth, Wickestane's only an excuse. They dance whenever they feel like, on any day of the year. There's always some festival they can use as a precedent. Well, I can't promise to come. I'm way behind on schedule, and I've a lot of work to do. Hendrik contemplated him in silence for a moment. Try to be there. For complete fulfillment, one should play one's full part in the community, and I'm sure you'll come to appreciate our little ceremonies. Everyone does. There was no doubt in his voice. It was a statement of fact. The following day, a Saturday, Adam and Matthew called for Margaret and Sandra at the museum. Kevin and his father, Dr. Lyle, were also there, and the sixth of them set off through the empty streets, guided by the sound of music. In the distance, a fiddle was playing a stately jig, accompanied by the rhythmic jingle of bells. As they came into the open, Matthew saw that the whole village seemed to have turned out. In a far corner, near the edge of the circle, a large group of onlookers was watching the Morris dancers weaving in and out of each other, the bells on their feet jingling in unison. The fiddler was George, the landlord of the pub. They strolled across the grass to join the spectators. The doctor asked Margaret about the origins of Morris dancing and why the participants had bells strapped to their ankles. The bells are there to keep them together, she said, but as for the origins, well, we can only guess. It's certainly very old, and I believe it was supposed to help fertilize the crops in the spring. The rhythm was very infectious. As the dancers formed and reformed themselves into intricate patterns, Matthew and Sandra started to clap in time to the music. The villagers nodded encouragement, and soon everyone was clapping. It was a gay, merry scene, and Matthew began to wonder why he had felt so jittery ever since coming to Millbury. It all looked so right. A small, peaceful community perpetuating an ancient custom of their ancestors. There was nothing at all to worry about. Two strange-looking figures began to weave in and out of the dancers. One, much larger than the other, wore a horse's head made of pasteboard and a wickerwork frame around its waist to represent the body. The smaller of the two wore the white mask of a clown and was beating those around him with an inflated bladder tied to a stick. Matthew turned to Margaret. Who are they? One's the hobby horse, she told him, and the other's the fool. They're both traditional figures, but don't ask me why. I think the fool's there to spur people on to greater effort. Gradually, almost without Matthew noticing it, the shape of the dance became circular, with the two masked figures in the center. Then the music suddenly stopped, and the dancers remained motionless, waiting expectantly. In the ensuing silence, the figures took off their masks. Margaret gasped. Adam glanced at her. What's the matter? That man. The one with the horse's mask. It's Tom Browning. And the other one's Jimmo, said Matthew quietly. They're not by any chance father and son. Margaret stared at them grimly. That's right. So, said Adam, what's the mystery? Tom's a farmer, the one the doctor and I were having dinner with that first night when everyone disappeared. He's one of the newcomers. I still don't see why you're upset. Margaret looked up at Lyle. Tell him, Doctor. It's out of character, said Lyle, frowning. Browning was so contemptuous of these local superstitions, said they were a waste of time. Anachronisms. Yet here he is, right in the thick of it. Adam looked at the two figures in the center of the circle. They were staring up into the sky as if waiting for a signal. Well, he's obviously changed his mind. Nothing wrong with that, is there? Suddenly, Jimmo jumped onto his father's back. The two of them raised their arms to the heavens and cried out in unison, Happy day! Happy day! Happy day! Adam felt a sudden chill, for standing on the other side of the circle, towering over the rest of the spectators, was Hendrik. And he was smiling. And behind that smile, there was a hint of